Hello, this is Montessa Young, Extension Educator for University of Idaho in Washington County, and I'm going to talk to you about your growing season. So what is a growing season? In Idaho, we typically define this as the frost-free season, so the time from your last frost in spring to your first frost in fall. Our growing season determines on what we can grow and how productive it will be over the season. So the first step is to determine your first and last frost dates. I found this great resource at davesgarden.com/guide/freeze frost dates, and it'll let you input your zip code and it picks out the weather stations that are closest to you. So in this table we see that we have Parma, Idaho in Canyon County. Down the left hand column is the temperatures, and across the top is the percentage. So this is the percentage chance. So let's say that we want to be sure that there's only a 10% chance of a spring 32-degree frost. Our first date that we could plant out was May 29th. The frost dates that are usually reported are the 50% frost dates. So on May 9th, there's a 50% chance that we may or may not get that 32-degree spring frost. One thing that's interesting is you look at different weather stations. If I could find a crop that would be okay down to 24 degrees, maybe some of my cool season vegetables, I could actually plant those out with a 50% chance on March 29th. So almost a month, 6 weeks earlier. So that gives us a little bit of variance in our first and last frost dates. As you can see, you can find the fall 32, the fall 28, and the fall 24 as well. So using these weather stations, you can determine how many growing days that you have each season. So there's other things we have to take into account other than just our first and last frost. I know for a lot of areas that we have very short springs. It seems to go from winter to summer, that we can heat up very quickly. That can cause some of our lettuce or our green crops to bolt or to go to seed. I have a hard time in my area doing broccoli and cauliflower because it wants to go to flower when our temperatures get too warm in the spring. We also have cool nights compared to states in the southern U.S. So crops like tomatoes, peppers, okra, sweet potatoes, their days to maturity might actually be longer here in Idaho than they are for the southern states where they're typically grown. And that's just because we cool down quite a bit at night. And the third thing we have to think about is hardiness zone, especially if we're growing a perennial crop or if we're looking for seed production in a biennial crop. The hardiness zone will determine if that plant is going to survive the winter or not. One date we want to pay attention to when we're looking to grow a crop from seed is its days to maturity or harvest. One thing to keep in mind is the tomatoes and peppers, that days to maturity is calculated from the transplant date. So if you've ever started tomatoes and peppers from seed, you know that it takes about 6 weeks to have them up to transplant size. You need to add that to your days to maturity or harvest. Another thing to consider is different varieties of the same vegetable can vary greatly in their days to maturity. This can be very useful. Let's say you want to plant a crop of lettuce and you don't want all of the lettuce to be ripe at the same time. You can plant two different varieties, one with a short days to maturity and one with a long days to maturity. And that way you can harvest for a longer time for one planting. Another thing to consider about your growing season is the temperature at which your seeds germinate. So if we look at tomatoes, we can see that the optimum temperature to germinate a tomato seed is around 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And that way we'll get no germination underneath 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So if we were to attempt to start tomatoes outside, we would have to wait for our soil's temperatures to warm up at least above that 59 degrees to get germination. If we look at Swiss chard, it'll germinate clear down to 41 degrees. And then spinach has a different pattern. If we look at optimum temperature is 68 degrees, maybe 69, 70, looking at that graph. But the germination actually goes down pretty sharply if it gets warmer than that. So if it's too warm outside or your soils are too warm, you might have trouble germinating spinach. And these graphs are a handy guide. These pictures were taken from johnnyseeds.com. So to learn more about the growing season, we have an excellent set of publications that will be available in the class and are available on University of Idaho publication site. And they are for short season, high altitude gardening. There's one called Gardening Strategies. There's one for growing small fruit crops, growing tomatoes, growing tree fruits, and vegetable gardening. And these will be linked and available in the course.